Welcome back to the second episode of our four-part video series, Admission Essentials by Sesameed Education. In this episode, we'll be covering the role of academics, activities, and references in the boarding school application assessment process. I'm your host, Daniel Cito. I'm an education consultant, founder and head of Sesameed Education. For those of you who are new here, Mr. Leo Marshall is our special guest for this series. Leo has served in the independent school world for 40 years, be it at day schools or boarding schools alike. As a teacher, as an athletic coach, director of college guidance, director of admissions, director of advancement, deputy headmaster, all the way to president and CEO. Now retired. Leo's last position was the director of admissions and financial aid at the Webb Schools in the United States. Welcome back, Leo.
Hi, Daniel. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, Leo. It's so good to have you back with us. Now, in this second episode, we'll be covering the three components, the first three components: academics, activities, and references. First, let's get into academics. Many parents would equate academics to simply school grades and standardized test scores. What's your opinion? What exactly do American boarding schools look for in academics?
Well, it's important to know that we rarely see poor academic students, meaning poor grades. This is what we call a self-selecting process. Parents do not apply to our schools who have students who are not doing well in school. Because of that, what we want to know is what goes into those grades, because there are some schools that we call inflate grades. So if we looked at a student from, let's say, one particular class or school, if we went to ask how many students in that school all got A's and they said, well, 90% of the students got all A's, then that doesn't tell us a lot about the student. We really want to know about the rigor of the school. That's what's really important. That tells us what the grades mean. Now, in the United States, we know many of the schools the students are coming to us from. So it's very easy for us to know that school based on, over the years, how many students keep coming from that school. So let's say in our small town, there are 3 or 4 small independent private middle schools, and those students come to us. If we track those students over 3 or 4 years and see what those grades mean, like the student has strong grades, how well did they do at the end of freshman year or sophomore year? That tells us something about how rigorous the school is. The challenge with the international schools is there's so many, we just don't know much about their grading systems. We really don't know the grading systems of schools in these various countries, and because they're so diverse. So that's a real challenge for us. We don't know what an A means. We don't know what a 94 percentile means. 94 percentile against what? So that's the hard part. We really want to know what goes into that grade. And when we get to the interview, which we'll talk about at some other time, that's where we try to learn a little bit more about that. So that's the hard part for us. We don't know a lot of times what these grades mean. So we have to dig a little bit deeper into other parts of the application. But certainly they have to have strong grades. If a student who's failing or struggling in school is not going to be considered. But very rarely will see those kinds of transcripts. It's just very rare.
But there's also a myth out there. Well, I wouldn't call it myth, but there's a strong opinion out there among parents or among families that good grades or straight A's would automatically lead into an acceptance offer by the boarding schools. How true is that from your experience? And what do these, top grades say and not say about the applicant himself or herself?
Well, it's not true at all. It's just not true. In my former school, we would see so many applicants with straight A's, but that just means, okay, they're good students, but there's too much more we're looking for than that. So there's never an automatic. You can have straight A's, have, perfect SSAT scores. It's still not an automatic. It just means, okay, he's a strong student. But that doesn't pull them out of the crowd necessarily, because I want to emphasize this. We see so many students with those same grades. So again, it goes back to the school. Do we know the school? If we know the school and we have a history of students coming from that school with those grades doing well, then we pay attention. If we have students coming from a school where they all get very strong grades, but then they come to us and struggle, that's a problem for us, for those candidates in the past, the future candidates from that school.
Leo, I have a question about, how meticulous boarding schools would be in looking at these nuances in the transcripts. Let's say two candidates coming from the same school, one has straight A pluses and the other has straight A's. So A's is already pretty good. I mean, really good. And of course, there's another, kind of genius out there, getting straight A pluses. Would the student with straight A pluses automatically have a much stronger chance of getting in than her colleague with only straight A's?
No. And again, I'm speaking in general because every school is different, but not necessarily. No, doesn't mean too much to us. If a student is spending all their time trying to get an A plus at the expense of other things they should be doing in school, in other words, doing other activities, if all they're doing is studying at night without anything else going on in their life, they're not very interesting. We're looking for interesting students. So if they have A plus, it doesn't matter to us. We don't know the grading systems at these schools. What does an A plus mean? It doesn't matter if a student has a B or, once in a while has a C, has an average grade. We're really interested in the interesting student. We just want to know, A, are they ready to do the work at our school? B, what goes into the academics? Are they interested in learning? Hopefully we learn that from the teachers. Or are they just trying to get a good grade? So I'll just study. And that is a bit of a myth, particularly in the international countries, that you have to have straight A's and then that will automatically get you in. But if it's done at the expense of other activities, the student does nothing else in their life except study, they're just not very interesting. But certainly through the discernment process, we may pick out a student who is beyond brilliant in mathematics. I'm talking about at a different level than other students, not that they got A's, but that the way they talk about and think about mathematics makes them a little bit more. And in one of my final year at the Webb Schools where I was, I met a young woman in Hong Kong. No, I'm sorry. I think she was in Shanghai. Anyway, she was remarkable. And we talked about mathematics and her level of understanding of mathematics, the level the way she thought about mathematics was extraordinary. Sure, that would catch our attention. If a student, who has a great grade in their English language program we find out that they're doing an enormous amount of reading outside school and they have a grasp of the English language that's a little bit beyond most. Sure, that catches our attention. But it doesn't mean the grade tells us that. We can often find out their interest when we get to the interview and go to that point. So that does help.
What would you say to those families where the student might occasionally have a little blip in his grades? Maybe some B's, maybe not C's, but occasionally some B's and stuff. What type of encouragement would you still give to these families?
Well, first of all, we have to be careful. And again, speaking in general about families, they shouldn't be putting too much pressure on their children. It may be that there's a piece of this academic program, this particular subject that they're struggling with a bit. That's we understand that. What we look for in a transcript, let's say in a transcript from the student coming from what would be a middle school transcript. Let's say we see a student who's taking biology. And let's say it's broken down into quarters or trimesters. And let's say the first 2 trimesters the student has A's. Then suddenly they have a C. We're probably going to ask a question, what happened? Now, it could be something happened in the child's life. But it could also be that for some reason the child just sort of got disinterested in school, which rarely happens. But we will look at that. And I want to speak more towards American schools. We can pick that out in a minute where a student has, A, B, C. What happened? Well, it doesn't mean they're eliminated, but we'll say, well, tell us more what happened. Because we know these are children. These are just, still adolescents and they have blips. But we don't want parents to start to get angry with their children, unless their children are just suddenly disinterested in school. But we don't want them to be angry with their children. We want to understand what's going on. But what will eliminate you is if there's a dramatic drop in grades, where students go from well above average to well below average. That right away will, even an American student right away they're not going to get looked at. But you don't see that too often, international students.
Let's follow on your earlier comment on SSAT, the standardized test. What role does that test serve in the overall assessment process, especially with its three components? How do school officers look at the components similarly or differently?
Well, it's from school to school. It's a little bit different, but for the most part, from my experience talking to my great colleagues over all these years, we just want to see standardized scores tend to verify the grades. So if we have a student with very strong grades but very low test scores, we're going to ask questions. We're going to say, well, what's that about? If we see some very strong scores and very low grades, we're going to talk about something else, like this student has the ability, but they're not performing. These are called aptitude tests. Do they have the aptitude to do a certain level of work? But they do kind of tell us whether these grades they have are credible grades. So if we start to see these, what they call anomalies, these high English grade, low reading score, we're going to ask questions, no question about it. If we see a very high math score and a very low math grade, we're going to ask questions also. What you don't want to be is a student with very high grades and very high test scores and very low grades. That is kind of a red flag. You go, wow, the student is obviously capable, but not doing well, not doing much in school. Again, you don't see those at a lot of our schools, but that would be almost an automatic no. So that would go back to your point. Someone says, well, all I got to do is get really great test scores and the grades don't matter. Well, no, it doesn't work that way. They work in combination with each other.
Got it. Now, in terms of standardized tests, there are actually two types. So one is called SSAT, and all boarding school applicants, regardless of which country they are from, they have to take it, both American applicants or international applicants alike. And then there's the one for non-English native speakers. Those are called TOEFL, tests of English as a foreign language. Those are for those students from countries where English is not the native language. What if a student does well in TOEFL, but not in SSAT English? How would you kind of balance those two phenomena?
We would ask a lot of questions, because the TOEFL score isn't perfect. We'd be a little bit skeptical of the TOEFL score. But at the same time, it could be that, on the other hand, it could be they're just not working hard in school and they have good English skills. But the reverse, if they have a low TOEFL score, let's say in listening, right? Or in speaking, but they have a very high grade in English, we really want to be sure that they have the language skills to participate in what is essentially an English immersion program. We don't have translators in the classroom to translate, and they're going to be reading physics books in English. They're going to be reading advanced biology books in English. They're going to be reading Western and Eastern literature. By the way, we do teach Eastern literature in English. So, these are books can be deep, and we want to be sure they can understand the language. So everything works in concerts. It's kind of common sense, even though sometimes when I talk to families, they don't understand that. High grade in English, low TOEFL score, we're going to ask questions. Okay, was this grade inflated? Does everybody get good grades? Was she just sat there and did her work and that's how you got a good grade? High TOEFL score, low grades. We're going to say what's going on in the classroom. But again, the problem is when you get to a school like my previous school, we had so many good students applying. Everything sort of looked the same. And that's when things get tough.
Gotcha. Let's move on to the area of activities. Early on, you mentioned that, grades are not everything, especially when students only get good grades at the expense of the involvement in meaningful activities. So when it comes to activities, how important are activities as a component of a student's life or profile? And how do schools look into these activities of students? And what do they say about the students themselves?
The bottom line is, and this sounds a little bit subjective, but no, we're looking for interesting students. We know the vast majority are very good students in the classroom, but what do they do outside the classroom? There are some students we interview that will go from their school to these cram course programs at night and to think they're going to get better grades, or it could be that their national examination requires them to do that. So that at the expense of doing anything else interesting, they're just not very interesting people. And we would see lots of those students doing that, or going to SSAT prep courses right after school at the expense of something they love to do outside the classroom. It doesn't make them very interesting. On the other hand, a student that works hard in school, but, loves the violin, or, loves to play oboe, and really works at that could be interesting, or it has a vast love for a sport and really does participate in the sport, works hard. We just want interesting people. It's hard to explain, how we pick that out, but you will know after a while, because there are some extraordinarily interesting adolescents that come to our door. They're just interesting. We love to talk to them. And sometimes they don't have all A's, but they're just interesting people. They've got these other interests. So going back to your question is, yeah, they're important, but I can't tell you which one thing to do. And then I've had parents ask me that. Well, if they just do this, you can just tell the students who have great interest in things. I mean, it goes on, and it's not necessarily community service, though that could be, but what level is a community service? I met a boy once, gosh, I forget where he was. I think it was Chengdu. And he was collecting library books for the poor and was doing it at a serious level. He just loved getting old books. And he was with his family, was collecting them and finding ways to deliver them. And the more we talked about it, I went, whoa, this is interesting. Not that he's going to do that in the United States, but he just was an interesting kid and still had pretty good grades. Some students just grab you with the kind of things they do. But what I can tell you we're not interested in is all they do is go to school and go to TOEFL prep and SSAT prep, and that's all they do. And that they're just not interesting. So parents got to be careful about that. Again, it often goes back to the parents thinking there's this formula. Go get good grades, go to TOEFL prep, go to SSAT prep, get a good score at the expense of everything else. And they have to remember, we're seeing hundreds and hundreds of applicants from overseas. So what stands out? It won't be their test score that stands out. It won't be their grades that stand out, because they all have good grades. What else stands out?
I would like to dwell on this particular point a little further. You had mentioned the word interesting, and that is so central. And this is also from my experience. I hear it over and over and over again from different admission directors all across the American boarding school world. However, because I do help send students to boarding schools outside of America, so I do notice that there's this different definition of interesting. So all boarding school directors, they look for interesting students, but their definition can be slightly different from country to country or from culture to culture. Would you mind to speak a little bit further?
It's hard to define. First of all, the person they're interviewing with from school to school, those are different personalities. So interviewers are different personalities. They may have different biases. I'm not saying it's a negative. They just have different things and grabs their attention. Some of the personalities work with each other. They just, wow, this is a great student. Some interviewers are better than others. Some interviewers get deeper into a student's activity. And I can tell you so many stories of the interviews I had, because my interviews personally tended not to be ever the same, because I just flowed with the student that came in the door. But when a student sits there and tells me he's been playing guitar for 12 years, we start talking about the music he's playing. Well, if it's two things. If he's just playing guitar and taking lessons, that's it. But he has a grasp and love for guitar and plays different genres, different kinds of music. And we get into engaging, because I'm a musician. We get into that kind of conversation. That catches my attention. I think we all intuitively know what an interesting student is, no matter what country you are. Lively, great personality, just has a love for life. Great to their parents, helps out at home, does things, wants to do things, wants to learn. Because that means they will come to our school and make our school a better place because they'll engage in the school. They'll participate in the school. They want to do things. Because at a boarding school, you're going to have to do something after school. You can't go back to your room and study. There's no test prep programs after school. You go to an activity, sports, art, music, whatever you decide. And usually there's three terms where you keep changing activities. We want them to want to do those kinds of things because students make our school a better place. So we're a bit selfish. We want our schools to be great schools. The only way we're great schools is by the students we have. And we love the students, and we love it when they come there. And sometimes they come to our schools because they have the kind of personality that wants to try new things. They come and find a new thing at our school that they've never tried before. And next thing you know, I'm thinking of a boy from overseas who was very shy in the interview, but we liked him, and his sister came with him. He went out for theater with a friend he met who was an American student, and both of them decided to try theater. They became amazing. He blossomed. He took a chance. He's out there singing solo in his later years. And I was in tears watching that because I remember how shy he was, but he tried something new and he found a bit of a passion. It's hard. It's heartwarming to see this happen. But a student who says, all I want is my good grades and I'm going to come to your school and just give me good grades so get me into you name the college, that's not a student we're interested in.
Thank you, Leo. I'm mindful of our viewers out there who might have like a younger children, but who aspire to eventually send their child to boarding schools. So for those parents who would like to help plan for the child's activities, what would you suggest in terms of depth, like very narrow, do one thing really, really well, or versus breadth, do a wide range of things, but, superficially well. And then, that's one angle. And then another would be allow the child to thrive on whatever he or she wants to do versus more so is directed by parents. And also maybe comment on those activities done within the school versus outside of school. How would you give advice to these families?
And I don't ask me to get into parenting. And so that's a sort of a subjective thing. I'm going to have my belief system. I believe children should be allowed to be children. I don't think you should be planning anything for your children at the younger age, except to plan to make sure that they get to learn to love to play, to enjoy things, expose them to different things. I have grandchildren I'm blessed with that their parents have exposed them to different things. And, both my children were wonderful athletes, for example, but they don't push them to a sport. They let them try different things. So exposing children to different things, but planning for them is not going to end well because you can't plan for your child at that age. They have to learn to be children. They have to learn to play, love play. And play means that they engage in other activities. And sure, expose them to things, but to tell the child, this is what you will do because we think someday it's going to get you here is a mistake. That's my particular parenting belief. And frankly, if you're in an interview with me as a parent, I never ask what the child did when they're in first grade. It doesn't matter to me at all. And if I find that a parent is kind of driven and the child is stressed out because they've been driven for 8-9 years, that will show. But we never ask what they do in primary school. Who cares? I mean, we just want to know, are they happy children? So you can't plan your child's life that way.
How would you view those children with a wide breadth of experiences, wide exposure, but, just dabbled on each one like fairly shallowly versus some child get really excited about that one thing? It could be an athletic sport, it could be music, it could be robotics, whatever it is, but spend the majority of the time on that one thing, but maybe a few others, but not a whole lot more. How would you kind of comment on the suitability of each type of students for boarding schools?
They're both fine. If you find a student that has a passion for robotics, Wonderful. Because they love it. Not that they're doing it because they think this will get them somewhere. The love for robotics, let's say, or their love for their activity. That's what we're trying to discern, particularly when we meet them. But if the other student is dabbling in things and just loves to try different things, that doesn't necessarily hurt them either. It's when they think that I'm building a resume. Now, on year one, I'll do this, then I'll change to this in year two. They're only doing it because they think they're going to program themselves for selection to a certain school. That's kind of different. But if a child has just got interests all over the place, which is very natural, great. Because as they get into high school, those interests will start to coalesce into something they really latch on to. I can't tell you how many students would come into grade 9 with one particular interest and drift over to something where they learn a thing called debate. And they said, oh, I like this. They try it and fall in love with it. They didn't do that in middle school, but because they're used to trying things, that would be helpful. But certainly if a student has a love for, let's say, a sport, and they really love it and they really do play it a lot and they try and they're on a team and they're trying, because they love it, not because it's a part of a resume builder, that interests us. So again, there's no one or the other. It just depends. Sometimes a student who has lots of interest is a very interesting person. And a student who's very focused, we call it the pointed student, that could be interesting also. Because if he's doing it because he loves it, as opposed to I have to do it, that's different. So I think parents know the distinction.
Allow me to take a little detour. In terms of presenting those activities, I've observed there have been occasional situations where I observe parents would hire professional agencies from different sources to come up with either a presentation manual, like a book, or some sort of a PowerPoint presentation, even video presentation about their child's various activities as part of the application submission or the submission for the application process. How would you comment on those professionally driven productions?
Waste of money, waste of time. They have no influence on us whatsoever. When we first started traveling overseas, particularly Asia, we started seeing so many of those, but they virtually mean nothing. First of all, we don't have time to look at those. You give us what we ask for in the application. You answer the questions on the application, you send your transcript, your teacher recommendations. That's it. If you are a gifted, let's say, cello player, certainly we're going to ask you I will go to my music director and they'll say, we want 3 pieces, very short, maybe Baroque, neoclassical, whatever. That's fine. That's different. But these portfolios that they're building have absolutely no meaning to us whatsoever. The parents are wasting their money. And I should say, and I retired in 2016, my last couple years at my school, we weren't seeing as many as we were in the earlier years. And that's in defense of the parents, they didn't understand. There's so many students applying to our school. They think, how does my student stand out? This must work. But we don't look at those at all. No, because they don't tell us anything. Colleges experience this too, and it rarely works. So colleges get this stuff all the time, and it rarely works.
Let's move on to the area of references. References are an important part in the overall assessment process as well. And for boarding school applications, there are references from teachers, school teachers, as well as from the parents. Now let's look into the teachers part. There are 3 teachers which will be required. One will be an English teacher, a math teacher, and a third teacher of the student's choice.
One other.
Yeah, one other. So would you like to comment on what the admission officers will look for from the English and math teacher references? And what is this third reference about? What do schools look for in that third reference?
Well, because we know across all curriculum, math and English is fairly standard. So that's why math and English as opposed to history and science. So many of these curriculum in the middle school is different from school to school, but the one constant is always math and English. So that's why we look, and I'm speaking about American schools too, not just international schools. And then the third would be one other. Typically, they ask you for a counselor and someone who knows the student outside the classroom. They can be very helpful if they're done well by the teachers. If the teacher says the student's perfect in every category, that doesn't tell us anything, because no child is perfect in every category. And so if a teacher is honest about this student, telling us what stands out, how the student stands out at this classroom, how they approach the classroom, those kind of things tell us a lot. And the third one could be one other. Typically, it's someone outside. In American schools, a counselor who knows his student can comment on how the student engages in students, in the life of the school. The problem overseas is many international schools overseas. These teachers are not used to doing these things. It's just not in their culture. They just don't do it. So we'll see these references that don't tell us much, and that becomes a problem. And I can't help these parents I can't help parents about this, because there's no way to get around it. We can tell right away this teacher may have 40, 50 students in the classroom and really doesn't know the student. So they don't help us at all. They'll just check the boxes, top and everything. And that doesn't mean anything. So the less we have, the more it becomes a little more subjective. But they can't go to the teacher and go and say, you must do this and there's no formula. The teacher hopefully would tell us what the student's like in the classroom. But if a teacher's sitting in front of 40, 50 students, it's pretty difficult to tell us about the student. But the references can be very helpful. In America, because we have local schools sending students to us regularly, we get to know the teachers from their grade 8, the middle school grade 8. So we can often contact that teacher, tell us more. There's some questions here we have. We can do that. We can't do that with students from other countries. So there are many times the international student is a little disadvantaged because the references aren't helpful at all. And in defense of those teachers, they've never done them before. Or the teacher is teaching mathematics in the language of the country that is not competent in English. So that's a tough one. I mean, do the references help? If they're done right, yeah, they can make a big difference. But again, I keep emphasizing this, we get so many good students, so many teachers think they're great students, it gets pretty tough making decisions.
Gotcha. How do parent references function differently than teacher references? Because parents would also are supposed to or expected to write something about the child. So how would you comment on those statements written by the parents themselves?
They can be helpful. They're usually just parent statements, you're right. But we love to know tell us about your child. What does your child do? Tell us about your child who love learning, whatever. And you can read some of those that you can see the parents really understand their child. And those can be helpful. They're not evaluated at all. They're not going to make the difference at all, except illuminate anything we can find that gives us a better understanding of who this child is, helps in the big picture. So think of the big picture: the grades, the test scores, the activities, the personal interview, the personal statement, and then what the parent tells us, the references. All of those come together at one point. So just tell us about your child. Tell us what they do and how they enjoy learning and how they create joy in your life. There's no formula, but we do read them. Yeah, we do read them, and they're helpful.
Is it okay for them to brag about or to demonstrate their pride of the child?
Sure, it's okay. Now, I want to speak to this for a minute. If the parent doesn't speak English, it's okay if they have a translator help them put their words on paper in English. It's okay if they do that. And I'm sure most will. That's okay.
Time flies, and we have covered the first three components of the assessment process: academics, activities, and references. Now, of course, we have two more parts coming in the Admission Essentials series, part 3 and part 4, covering the personal statements and interviews. But for today, before we leave, what one thing would you like to share with our viewers if they walk away from today's lesson, and what would you like them to remember?
I think that you have to know the school that you're applying to. We haven't talked about that. You must know the school you're applying to, not just pick the school because some ranking system says it's number 1 or 2. And I'm going to tell you over and over again, those ranking systems are meaningless, but no one seems to believe us. But know the school, because we're going to ask you, why are you here? And every school is different. So if they've done the research and if they're working with a consultant, that's fine. But they're picking the school for the right reason, that this school, based on our research, this seems to match my child. That will come out when they come to the campus or when they're interviewed overseas. Do you know my school? If you don't know my school, you're not going to do well, because you're only applying to us because you think we're going to be getting you into the next level university. So we can pick that in a minute. But the student that knows a school, that comes there and we've done the research, we love this school, that helps. It's not guaranteed, but it certainly helps. We want to know that they're interested in us for who we are, not what we're going to get them someday. And so know the school, do the research. Don't have people tell you, don't have your neighbor tell you this is the best school. Because I used to tell that to parents, your neighbor's not sending your child to the school. So don't listen to your neighbor, and much as you love them, your neighbor does not know the school, and just say that you do the research, and maybe you have some help with someone, to work through this, because there are so many schools. But if you don't know the school, you're just there hoping to get in because you think someday it'll get you to, you name this university, we'll find that out. We'll know that pretty quickly. And if you come to school and say, I'm interested in your orchestra, and the school doesn't have an orchestra, you're going to go, okay, this student doesn't know our school. That doesn't happen too often, but it does happen. So get to know the school.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Leo, for your sharing and for your time.
My pleasure. I hope this was helpful, and good luck to all the parents out there. And we hope that they learned a lot from these sessions. And do look at your schools, do the research, go to the websites, and find out what school grabs your heart.
Thank you, Leo, and we look forward to having you back for our part 3. To all viewers out there, if you would like to keep learning more admission tips and tricks from Leo, please stay tuned to our part 3 of our Admission Essentials series, which will be exploring the role of personal statements in the overall boarding school application process. And if you like what we have shared today, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to Sesameed Education. Thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Admission Essentials.